Saturday.
Where am I?
You're in a faster time stream.
Baby.
You didn't save me.
So I have to choose.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Who. I believe the internet's only live discussion debate show about the latest episodes of Doctor Who, and you're with us. I'm Sean Harry. I'm joined by my constant companion, Elisar Cabrera.
Hello.
And our special guest star this week, this Wednesday, is Jeremy Bentham.
Wonderful to be here, guys.
Jeremy Bentham, you're like one of the top...
the authority in the
authorities in Doctor Who fandom, as one of the co-creators of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society.
Which seems like a damn long time ago now, it really does.
Back in what, 76, 77?
1976, when a decision was taken to take a small little college-based internal fan club and broaden it out to the world. Oh God, if we'd known.
And how many members were in that first group then?
I'm not sure how many numbers there were in the original college group, because I came along after that had been formed, but I think our initial membership after about a month or so, I think we had something like about 154.
That's pretty good.
But thanks to the producer at the time, Philip Hinchley, putting a little mention about the society in the Radio Times just before the Mask of Mandragora went out, all of a sudden the mailbag just exploded, and on and off it really hasn't stopped exploding since then.
Were you involved with the first few conventions?
Oh, the very first one, yes, the very first one.
Because we may, oddly enough, have bumped, because I remember about the age of 6 or 7 being taken to this church hall.
That was the one, yeah.
And I missed John Pertwee there, but Tom Baker and Louise Jameson were there, and I actually remember seeing a recreation of the Gold Emperor Dalek from the TV 21 comic, which I was more excited seeing that than seeing Tom Baker.
Yes, because in those days the society actually had its own drama department.
Oh my goodness!
Stage plays in church school and in schools and church halls for younger members of the public, and one of the props they actually built was a Gold Emperor Dalek based on the TV Central.
Oh my goodness! Yes.
Version.
Great. Well, should we just go through the ways that people can communicate? On Twitter at Talking Who. Obviously, if you're watching us on Ustream, we are monitoring the Ustream chat room. So, if you've got some questions for us, and particularly if you've got some questions for Jeremy about his long association with Doctor Who fandom, please get them in on the Ustream chat room. We'll be reading the best ones out.
I'll be checking the chat room periodically, so if you have any questions or queries, please comment in here and let us know what your thoughts are.
And tweet your friends, let them know that you're watching us so that they can come and join us as well.
As we were saying, we're joined this week by Jeremy Bentham, one of the top authorities on Doctor Who. We're going to be discussing the latest episode as well as the latest DVD release.
Indeed. Sean, you're just back from Dragon Con.
Yes, in Atlanta.
How was the Doctor Who fandom out there?
Well, Dragon Con, it gets about 60,000 people to it. It takes place across 4 hotels, and it's a 5-day long convention. And everywhere you look, there were fezzes all over the place. Probably dressing up as Matt Smith or Karen Gillan was probably the most popular thing among all the cosplayers.
And any particular outfit for Karen Gillan?
It wasn't so much
micro mini skirts.
I saw very few police costumes,
really,
but a lot of red wigs.
Because I thought you can get a police costume quite easily from any sort of costume shop.
Maybe not. Mostly the
Ann
most
Summers,
I
for
think
instance.
the most popular look was a red jumper and a short skirt.
Right.
That kind of look. But probably the weirdest thing I saw when I was at Dragon Con was at 3 o'clock on the Saturday morning. A lot of drunken hedonism going on there. And one poor girl had got so drunk she'd fallen over backwards and hit her head on the marble floor.
Ooh,
so she had she had a concussion, and I saw her being taken off in a stretcher in an ambulance, and it was very bizarre seeing a poor girl in a stretcher in her Leela costume. And there was a lot of people taking pictures of that.
I'm sure there were.
Yes.
Hello to Naked Scarf. They just tweeted us in
well,
Twitter.
if they're wearing a scarf, they're not naked.
Well, we were the Naked Scarf podcast. When they were guests replacing you a couple of weeks ago, and I was trying to get to the bottom of what the Naked Scarf signified, but they're being very, very coy. At least, well, Andy from the Naked Scarf was being very, very coy about that. But we'll get it out of her one day.
Now we also have in the message boards on YouTube, change the words to. He's asked, did you ever meet Pat Troughton or William Hartnell?
Never William Hartnell, unfortunately.
Did you meet? Because I met at the second Doctor Who convention Heather Hartnell, William Hartnell's wife, who actually did conventions for a period. But how did you find Pat Troughton?
Pat Troughton was amazing, and he had an amazing approach to it, because for years he would refuse to do conventions because his belief, rightly or wrongly, was that if I turn up, you'll be able to see how the magic works, and all of a sudden you'll be seeing me as the actor as opposed to Patrick Troughton. But what he figured out after he'd had his arm twisted about by John Pertwee to say, you really must do these conventions, they're great fun and quite remunerative, was he figured out he'd actually turn up as the second Doctor. So on the few occasions before his tragic death in 87 when he did conventions, you'll always notice he turned up with his costume. So what he was actually doing was again delivering that consummate performance as the second Doctor, not as Patrick Troughton, who was quite an intensely private man, and found it very, very difficult to be Patrick Troughton in the audience. But once he figured out all he had to do was just be his batty self in the programme, that's what the fans were expecting to see, so he was delivering exactly what the fans wanted to see. And of course, both here in the States, they absolutely positively lapped it up, which was wonderful. But Hartnell and I never met, and that along with the first script editor David Whittaker and Roger Delgado, the first master, I always regret that I never had a chance to say hello to them.
Okay, cool. So if you've got any more questions for Jeremy, please do keep either tweeting or in the YouTube chat room, but mainly in the Ustream chat room as well. Hello to Best Doctor Who there. Best Doctor Who is a big fan of Patrick Troughton, so he'll be pleased to hear more Patrick Troughton stories.
We also have the Naked Scarf is actually pointing out about nobody parties quite as hard as nerds.
Well, indeed, absolutely.
Yes.
I'm sure you saw lots of that.
Yes, we did actually at DragonCon. Yeah, it was a lot of alcohol.
I can predict, actually, at the next conventions, we'll start seeing a lot of the older Amy samurai outfits. Do you think,
kind of
from this week?
Yes.
Oh, you can almost put that in it.
You can, yes, I would have thought so.
Now, what I found quite actually interesting was before this episode aired, when the teasers first aired, a lot of fans actually thought this was going to be a return to the land of fiction. A lot of people actually thought that the robots in this were a modern update of the white robots from the Mind Robber,
the art direction
and the white background.
It
and
did remind
like
me
that,
of Patrick Troughton kind of story. It was sort of it was that kind of world they created.
It was
really
very similar to the first episode of the Mind Robber.
Yeah,
in the fact that it was just basically the main cast within this environment.
Doctor Who has done time and time again, every so often.
Since the very second,
slows things down and gives you like a 3 or 4-hander performance, just to almost re-establish the characters.
Yeah.
You think David Whittaker did it first with The Edge of Destruction, doing 4 episodes, two episodes with just the 4 of them inside the TARDIS, to really build everyone's kind of knowledge of the characters and what they were transforming into. One of the episodes, unfortunately, I missed in my entire life, the first episode of The Wheel in Space, is almost a 2-hander between Jamie and the Doctor. As somebody said on one of the fan episodes, it's the episode where the Doctor and Jamie have lunch, and that's basically what that is. And then again, you jump forward to something like the first episode of The Ark in Space, you really establish Sarah, Harry, and the Tom Baker Doctor. With that first episode, where there's no one else in it apart from a couple of disembodied voices. So it does work for the programme every so often, giving you an episode to get to know the characters. And I must admit, for me, it's the one that suddenly sold me that yes, Karen Gillan really does have a much greater range than I think up until that point she'd been allowed to.
As an actress, you mean? Absolutely, because her performance as the older Amy was just. I was quite actually shocked.
I've got to give it
that she actually really pulled it off that well.
You got to not just her, but also the makeup department.
Makeup was fantastic.
it was like, but you could really believe that was much better than when they aged David Tennant, I've got to say.
But this was about the love really between Amy and Rory, wasn't it? This is the love story being focused on more, I think, than I guess because Amy's character has always been a bit flippant. Rory's always running after her, and yes, he's running after her to save her this time. But you get a real sense she really, really loves him.
It's the difference between maturity and youth.
Yes.
You're used to the younger Amy. We always are. But I think it probably is fair to say that in the episodes where Alex Kingston's in there, most of the time you're watching Alex Kingston's strength and depth in her character, rather more than Amy, who's fabulously pretty girl, but she's there to do almost the traditional Doctor Who girl role.
Yeah.
Which in this episode was wonderful because you actually got a chance to say you're not being the typical. You're someone that's been through the mill, come out the other side. And in a way, you've got that. She had that similar sadness in her character that you saw a little bit of Elizabeth Sladen projecting when she did School Reunion some years earlier.
But there seems to be a theme running through recent Doctor Who that the Doctor lets people down. And this, I guess, really reinforces that, isn't it? Is that you just somehow you can't rely on the Doctor, even though we know the Doctor's doing his best to save them. The older Amy feels that she's been essentially betrayed.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there because you said he's always trying to do that. I think where the subtleties in the script writing comes, the fact that he's not Captain Kirk, that there is fallibility in the character. There always has been fallibility in the character. He doesn't necessarily always win, or even sometimes when he has, something's gone wrong. Occasionally something goes wrong, that twists the sword and makes it happen differently to the way in which he would have liked to have seen it happen. I'm thinking here possibly of episodes like the Vulnerable Snowman, where the Doctor lets the intelligence escape, and then what happens? He pays the price a few stories later. When invigorated with a new strength, it comes back with the idea of capturing the Doctor to enable its own plan for conquest.
Indeed. And what was I going to say now?
The Daleks' master plan, he lets two of his companions die.
Yes.
But I guess the Russell T Davies era seems to, people define it as Doctor as Superman, as the superhero who can do anything, do everything.
I have a little bit of a problem with that, and I think it was right that when they did the Waters of Mars, you find out there's a price to be paid if you really let yourself believe that.
But there did actually used to be a bit of criticism of Tom Baker's era, that he got to become a bit too almost superheroic when he would turn up, and there was very much
down to the strength of his companions to pull him back and remind him that we can't always do it.
But that was much of why they formatted Peter Davison's character in the way they did, to try and create more fallibility in the character after Tom Baker's period.
Yes, and to introduce this idea that this was a Doctor that wasn't as strong as his predecessor, that he relied a lot more on his companion. The brain was still there, the mind was still there, but somehow his personality wasn't quite strong enough to get it over. He was the one continually being dragged away and told to be quiet and sit in the corner and let Janet Fielding do the bolty stuff.
We had some tweets during the week from some fans regarding this episode of The Girl Who Waited. Mr. Chuck 719 says Warrior Pond is beautiful. At Sue Davies 7 of 9 says Karen and the script achingly expressed the despair and bitterness of the princess in the tower, forced to rescue herself. At Gallifrey Times says the episode was amazing, a lot more action scenes than a regular episode. And at Lucy Grenville says best episode of the whole series, original, action-packed, very emotional, and amazing acting from everyone, especially Karen. I read a lot of tweets actually, people saying this was their favourite episode of the series to date.
I would be very surprised if it's not up there in the top when the season survey is done by Panini later on. Because I think it will be a strong contender. I'm almost of the opinion the only other one at the moment is possibly Doctor's Wife, Neil Gaiman's one.
Well, yes.
I was actually just thinking of that. Those two are, I think, the two stand out.
Do you think that would be split between long-term fans going with the Doctor's Wife and new fans going with The Girl Who Waited? It's
now whether there's a gender issue in there, because I imagine,
or yes, a gender issue indeed.
Gender, if what you know, the way sometimes girls think, they like the emotional content, they like the human interest, and if there's one thing that possibly we've had missing from with the departure of Russell T Davies, has been that soap opera emotional connection of it. Stephen Moffat's an incredibly creative and talented and clever writer, but he's writing much more for the situation. it takes stories like this to come along and remind you, yes, there can be a great deal of soap opera depth in there as well. You don't have to do everything at breakneck speed to be able to achieve a story that people will really get interested with. But we'll see. It depends what we've got to come up and what other people's opinions are of the more action-packed stories we've seen this year.
Production design on this episode I thought was fantastic as well. Yeah. The garden, just the building itself.
The garden seemed very Tim Burton-esque.
Very Tim Burton, yes, no, absolutely. Just the whole overall look of it. And again, starting off quite simply with just white rooms, but just sort of opening up into this sort of, this is, I guess, a very science fiction-y world that they created.
Well, it works because it's got that. It has got that blank canvas. There is a starkness to it, so your eyes are going to be drawn to the characters a lot more, and they're going to be drawn to the motifs. If you think about the garden, it wasn't seen very, very much.
No, sure.
A little bit of you did see it was suddenly quite eyeballingly jolting.
Yeah.
You took perhaps far more notice of it than just. I'm thinking almost of the previous week's episode, The Doll's House, which was rather, to my mind, was rather so poorly lit that you had to wait until Confidential came along and afterwards figure out, it is a kitchen in a doll's house. Fine. Could somebody just crank the lighting up just a little bit to see within the episode?
Change the words too, by the way, going back to your question about meeting Patrick Troughton. Just want to say thank you for answering my question.
Mm-hmm.
Troughton was great. I do agree with you.
He was superb. He was a very gifted performer. A lot of people, even some of the doctors, still reckon he gave almost the template performance for the Doctor, over which a lot of them have built their interpretations, probably more even so than William Hartnell's.
And actually, to some extent, it was probably the changeover from Hartnell to Troughton was probably the single most important one, because once Troughton had established it, it was accepted after that. But when he first did it, if the audience hadn't gone with what he did, that would have been it for the show.
And that is the great strength of Doctor Who, is that it can actually achieve these television firsts, and it works. Even more than, say, something like Dallas, where you can suddenly just change a character, totally different actor, and years later everyone thinks, oh, that was just so false, wasn't it? No, Doctor Who got away with it. It was a huge gamble, but the fact that they did carry it off and it didn't lose audiences was just a tribute to inventiveness.
They were originally planning on doing the regeneration in the Celestial Toy Maker, and it wasn't going to be a regeneration. It was that the Celestial Toy Maker had changed the Doctor's form. Right.
And it was lovely they kept that idea when they did the regeneration, that at first you weren't certain if it was the real Doctor. The final transmission scripts toned that down a little bit, but there was still this idea you weren't really going to be certain right up until the end that this wasn't just some imposter that had beamed himself aboard in place of the Doctor.
So overall, The Girl Who Waited.
Well, I think we've accepted this is probably one of the best episodes this season so far.
Yep. So tweet us your own thoughts if you agree. Please do at Talking Who or in the Ustream chat room.
Now, as somebody who was, I think perhaps more than any fan, but somebody who's watched the series throughout its entire history, how do you feel about the new series itself, both from the start with Christopher Eccleston and how it is now at the moment?
I never lose my interest and enjoyment in it. I mean, I know a lot of people criticise the Colin Bakers of Sylvester McCoy period, but there's still a lot of good done that time.
Actually, I'll actually go with you on the Sylvester McCoy period. The last 2 seasons of McCoy's period are probably among the best from that period.
The only thing that I really could criticise at the time was the inconsistency. You'd have something amazing like Remembrance of the Daleks, then followed by something a little bit more questionable like the Happiness Patrol. Now,
and then you get Greatest Show in the Galaxy.
Now you have a greater sort of stability of the programme.
I don't know. I would disagree with you on that, because you can have at the moment the series, you can have one episode, The Girl in the Fireplace, and then the next week it's Love and Monsters. But I think that's what's great about the whole format of Doctor Who, is because each story you can do something completely different, but that does mean one week you can have something absolutely brilliant, and then the next week something they try and it doesn't quite work.
And I know it's only a generalisation, but if you look at how people have commented on the series since it came back, probably the only one that's been scored as a clunker was the Fear Her episode.
Yeah.
Which you can't
Well,
think they weren't making it the same way that they always made them.
There's also the Absorber lot.
That's what I just said. Love and Monsters
Yeah.
for me. That for me was the nadir of the new series. But Peter Kay running around.
A Naked
green
Scarf
with a-
says in the chat room, "I love the Happiness Patrol." So I just want. He just.
Well, you
wants
see
to-
that's the interesting thing about Doctor Who is that no matter how bad you may think a story is, there is going to be people who actually do enjoy it,
and rightly so. You
Yeah.
know, I think if everyone agreed that it's terrible, and that metric carried on, you could see
Yes.
a very slow
I mean,
death of the program.
I've been quite surprised when they started releasing the stories on video, that stories I hadn't seen or had very shaky memory of from being so young, stories that fandom had seemed to accept were terrible, I absolutely fell in love with.
Yeah.
And I did notice there was a massive shift in opinion towards the Graham Williams era once those stories were on video.
I really, really enjoyed watching The Sunmakers again.
Yes.
I hadn't seen it for a number of years, and suddenly you're seeing it almost fresh, and you think, my God, Jameson was brilliant in that.
But what I think really made The Sunmakers was the fact the script was so good on that one. That was really Robert Holmes. I think that was one of his best ones. He was very much on his ball on that one.
And when you think that was done at a time when video was only just tape recorders were only just coming in, it was a story that really bared repeat viewing because you got so many of the jokes and the comments and the references the second or third or fourth time round than ever you'd have probably got on the first time, just belting through it at a rate of knots.
We've actually got somebody just posted in here that he has a friend who doesn't like Genesis of the Daleks. Which actually just shows you how divergent opinion can be.
A comment from Tom Greaves. We've got a comment from Brad 1980-2012 who says, "It seems like this season is focusing a lot on doubles of people. 2 Doctors, 2 Amys, the Gangers. There's lots of themes of doubles."
It's it's a long history of doing that in Doctor Who. You're right.
Yeah.
That's the Massacre. If you want to see it done the first time round, doesn't mean there's anything wrong. It gives the actors a chance to do something different from their role. It gives Stephen Moffat an even greater chance to confuse the hell out of us as to which doctor's aboard the TARDIS is the right doctor on the TARDIS, which doctor dies, and all those questions are waiting to be answered.
Going right to the very, very beginning, how did you discover Doctor Who? What made you watch the first episode? Because obviously nowadays it's like there's publicity galore for a show like this.
Weirdly, funny, this was a question that came up recently. I dig back in the memories for this. I do remember being off school, as I was that young, with a bad cold, and on the radio on the Wednesday or the Thursday there was this trail for it, which featured a snatch from the music, and what's the secret of the phone box in the junkyard? Find out on Saturday with Doctor Who. Now somehow in my head I got this idea that the word Who was spelled either H-U or W-U, and I kind of was expecting to see something about Chinese Oriental despots with mad axemen running
kind of
around London.
Fu Manchu inspired,
Which I can't. I must have been too young to have read Sax Rowan, but I do have this image that this is what I was going to see. So whether I'd read Tintin or something like that beforehand. So initially it was a bit of a jolt thing. Oh, it's being set in a school, okay. And then when the Doctor does turn up, he's very un-Oriental, although startling enough
interesting, because obviously we would watch the DVDs now, and obviously we know what the show is, but you don't get a sense of science fiction for quite a while in that first episode, do you?
And when it does come, that first time when you go through the doors of the police box, and suddenly you've got a set that's unlike anything that's been done on television before. That was one hell of a jolt. The first dematerialisation is still an incredible bit of optical effects for the time.
Yeah.
And that last sequence, the show was frightening to me at the time. Just when you see that dark shadow falling over it, that's enough to chill you to the marrow. And then when it says next episode, the Cave of Skulls, dead things and animated skeletons, and already it's setting the scene for what you're going to see the next week, even though you've no idea what the heck it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I always think if you've not been frightened by Doctor Who a little bit in your life, you've missed a part of what really cements in your consciousness.
The one that absolutely scared the bejesus out of me was Mr. Sim.
Yes, a lot of people.
Terrified me.
It was because it broke one of the taboos that a lot of producers were about, was showing blood.
It was actually that image of the blood on that when he lifts up the Jago lifts up the hand and it's covered in blood. But there was just something about the whole look of it and everything. He was terrifying. He was.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there's no way you were going to miss it the next week, were you?
Actually, I did. I didn't watch any. I think I got through the first 2 episodes. The stories I wasn't allowed to watch as a kid. I got the first episodes of Terror of the Zygons, an episode into Pyramids of Mars, and then
you
Talons
really
of
had a
Red
rough
Giant.
upbringing there.
No, my parents were like, "No, we're not having if you're reacting like this to it." But
If only I'd watched the Sylvester McCoys, it would have been so much easier.
You got to visit the set of the Dominators, is that correct?
That was my first. Yes, this was almost a question of blagging your way in. As a friend of mine and I decided we were going to try and do this. We had no idea they were even going to make Doctor Who that day. We were just lucky it was a Friday, and turned up at the main gate and said, "Oh, I've got this invitation to see Doctor Who being made." So after some whiles and a few phone calls, the security guard took us up to one of the viewing cameras, and you saw a bit of. I couldn't tell you which episode was being made, but it was. Later on, when you saw the little drilling rig and the bits of the flying saucer, that must have been the Dominator. So.
And the Quarks themselves were actually introduced as an attempt to replace the Daleks.
Yeah. When you kind of think what must have been the minds of Mervyn Hazel and Henry Linker.
In their minds was how much money has Terry Nation made.
Yeah, if you ever see something like the Robocop movie, you probably get this idea that Hazel and Lincoln, they probably wanted something like those Titanic robotic soldiers that you see in Robocop, and what they got was a couple of sort of little Teletubby things looking very cute, but not at all threatening, that were supposed to be the most feared robots.
Brad 1980-2012 says on the subject of being scared, my son still has nightmares about the waters of Mars. Because they were pretty scary faces, actually, the waters of Mars, weren't they, when they were dribbling water?
Oh yes, I mean that's the genius of Graham Harper, isn't it? He knew exactly how to not give away a monster until right at the moment. You saw him transforming in the background, one of the girls chattering away, watering the plants, and you know something's happening.
Yeah.
So if you're of a certain age, you're sitting there thinking, behind you, and then of course right at the end you get the shock reveal just before it cuts. Brilliant bit of horror.
And Barry Aldridge says, like I said last week on the show, Patrick Troughton will always be my favourite Doctor.
I think how many people agree with that sentiment? He is. I mean, he had a unique quality which enabled him to switch almost instantaneously between being clownish and being very deep. You know, people say, "Oh, what were your favourite moments of Patrick Troughton?" I still think when To the Cybermen was returned in 1991, and you finally got to see the scene with him and the two-hander between himself and Victoria in the tombs. It's a wonderful bit of the Doctor making a connection with him. And even at the time, you kind of think, wow, he's actually talking a little bit about his own background. He says it with such conviction, and then suddenly switches back into Doctor mode straight after that. You realise the Doctor has this great ability to map himself to the people around him. That's how he always blends in on the environments that he goes
It's just
to.
such a shame. With Troughton's work, so much of it is now missing.
If you could have a magic wand to bring back one missing serial, which one would it be, do you think?
If it's an entire serial, I would always go with Marco Polo. Simply because as a youngster I didn't really appreciate it. You were waiting for the Daleks to come and you think, oh my god, how many more episodes before he gets to the Daleks and goes away. But later on, when you got to read the scripts of it, and when you finally found someone who had the audio of it, you realise it's one of the most lyrically beautifully written stories of all time, with absolutely pitch perfect performances by the three guests, and it builds to just, you know, the finale's coming even though you're waiting a long time for it.
Interesting enough, out of all the stories that were produced from the black and white era, more copies of Marco Polo were made for foreign distribution,
but they still can't get hold of them.
But it does give hope
that they might
eventually find one.
You'd love to have the time to start writing to embassies and just saying that, you know, dear Chinese embassy, did anyone in the BT ever give you this example to the Italian embassy?
Well, I'm trying to remember his name now. Who's that music producer who's the big Doctor Who fan?
Ooh, which one? Jeff Wayne?
Ian Levine. That's it. Ian Levine. Didn't he spend like $3,000 on one phone call to Nigeria or somewhere?
Oh, I think it's more cumulative rather than just a one phone call. But I mean, you know, the guy's persistence was rewarded, because look at the amount of episodes that he has turned up. Look at the ones he has returned. You think that there was a time when 132 was the magic number, which you didn't think would go below. Now, all right, it's painfully stuck at
108 for a long time,
now.
sure.
Well, I think there's been 2 return this decade.
Yes, and sadly they're all ones that we've got, but you still
Oh
hold
no! We had, what was it? Dalek Master
you
Plan
mean the
episode.
ones?
We had Dalek Master Plan episode 2, and the Crusades.
That was like 2001,
Yes.
I think was the Crusade.
And I think Dalek Master Plan was about 2005. So it's been a good. We're definitely due a story sometime.
No, I really do think it's one of two things going to happen. Some of the old boy collectors who really treasure the uniqueness of having the one example in the world of something. That I think if they do pass on, their other halves or their estates will say, well, look,
Give me their addresses. I'll go around and I'll shoot them.
Or if when finally access is given to Zimbabwe again, and people are likely to possibly go in there and find out if there's anything there. That's the one remaining place that may still hold something.
So audio taping back then. I mean, describe the experience of actually recording the audios.
Oh, it was nightmarish because I started taping in about 1968 when my parents got me finally badgered for Christmas to get a tape recorder. And initially, of course, it's a microphone that you use, which can have hit and miss depending on what kind of signal you get from the television. And of course, if you had to go away on holiday, and I confessed this the other day to somebody that in the days when hotels had a television lounge, it's the UK hotels, I was the little sod that around about 4 o'clock in the morning would creep downstairs and just with a little screwdriver, slightly untune ITV and BBC Two, so the next day World of Sport was on. Oh dear, you couldn't get a good picture. Oh, BBC One's got a good picture. So I'd be down there with them recording it, and magically the signals would retune themselves sometime on late Saturday evening, early Sunday morning.
And was it just to listen to for yourself, or would you have friends round, discuss the shows, or
Well, the weird thing was, really up until fandom started to emerge from its cocoon in the early 70s, there was certainly a period of time I thought I was the only Doctor Who fan in the entire world. Round about the 70s, there was this great move for sort of realism and cop dramas. You look at the early 70s; they're absolutely covered in everything from the American cop dramas like Cannon and the like, and Melinda and Wife, to all things like the Sweeney and things are being done over here. And science fiction was always being edged out. You think between UFO being made by Jerry Anderson, and when Anderson came back to space in 1999, very little was made. And that's the time when you really start to get this lonely feeling that I'm taking it just for myself. And it's quite remarkable to find out about 1974 that there actually had been a Doctor Who fan club in existence for a few years, being based up in Scotland. So join that, and probably there's one guy running his own, and probably as anyone will tell you who's ever run a fan club, doing it on your own is almost impossible. You need more than one people to share the load. Hence, that was one of the reasons why the Appreciation Society came into being, just to try and do something that would offer a little bit more in the way of regularity.
What was the first story you taped on video?
On video, it was one of the repeats. It was when they did the Sunmakers and Invisible Enemy and the Sunmakers. They repeated 2 over the summer break.
Yeah.
And I had this great big clunky old Philips machine, and the tapes were we say £15 a tape. People now will go, that's a lot. £15 tape.
It was a lot of money then, yes.
You edited out every single frame that wasn't needed.
I remember the first 2 I taped, and it was the only 2 I taped for a long while because I only allowed 1 tape at that age. It was Destiny of the Daleks and City of Death. But I had to kind of do this pause and record to try and keep the I almost tried to turn them into a movie length thing. So I then had the space to put 2 stories within a 3-hour tape.
Exactly the same principle. And yet now you go onto the shelves of the stores, and there they are. There's just lazy sleep of Doctor Who.
And of course, with the work they've done on the DVDs, you're watching them actually in a far better quality than you probably ever watched them ever before.
Not necessarily a better quality. What people forget is that when they were first transmitted, I'm thinking probably the Pertwees here.
Yeah.
They were all of the quality that I think it's fair to say Ambassador's Death Part 1.
That's the earliest originally,
one where they've got the original tapes. And you look at that first episode, it's absolutely as crystal clear as almost anything seen.
There's actually very few of the Pertwee stuff that's actually available in the original format it was transmitted.
And so although the restoration team has done a brilliant job in getting it absolutely as best as they can, it's a lot of them still fall short of the quality that audiences who first had colour televisions in the 70s would have seen them.
Well, I have to say, what they did, they must have. I mean, the quality of Spearhead from Space, the recent reissue of it, where they've gone back to the original 16mm negatives. That, I mean, I can't believe the original TV release looked that good. I mean, it looks fantastic.
Not just the picture as well. I think Mark Ayres did a superb job in working on the soundtrack to get rid of some of that echoey tinniness that was very evident on the earlier versions, and that's almost in a way improved the quality of the sound.
There was something about watching it when I recently watched it on DVD. What they've done with the picture quality of it, it doesn't look like a TV production anymore. It actually looks like a Hammer horror movie from the period, or something like that.
Tyburn or something, Tyburn films or something like that. Yes, very much straight back on it.
Doctor Who Weekly. How did your involvement with the magazine come about?
Oh, that was literally just a gradual process of osmosis. You started doing fanzines with the Appreciation Society. Then the commercial boys would suddenly figure out, oh, there's a lot of interest in this Tom Baker Doctor Who stuff. Let's see if we can get some interview material together. So they bring up someone like the BBC and say, oh, who can we talk to that knows a bit about the programme? They say, oh, we'll talk to the Appreciation Society. So the next thing you know, you'd have one of their journalists banging on the door looking to do, can we do a feature on all the companions? Who are all the companions? And then when they figured out, oh, actually write a few words yourself, right, well, how about that? And then when Deskin successfully trailed the idea of Doctor Who Weekly to BBC Enterprises to replace the fact that TV Comic had lost the Doctor Who licence, obviously they have to worry about, if it's going to go weekly, we've got to have some feature articles, and they're a lot cheaper to do than the comic strips. I was one of the names that came up in the frame, and for my sins I said, well, I'll do it, not knowing what I was kind of letting myself in.
Well, no, a weekly magazine is a huge commitment. I mean, that's astonishing.
It lasted about a year as a weekly magazine, didn't it?
Yes, and it is fair to say that after about 6 or 7 months, sales were starting to slip off a bit, and they made this decision that, okay, well, I think we're probably aiming this at a slightly too old an age group. Let's take it down and make it a little bit more like TV Comic. They got even more punished with the sales falling down, so it was then that the incoming editor, Paul Neary, so well, let's try it the other way round. Let's make it a monthly. Let's make it much more for what you're telling us the fan age is, and see what happens then. At least our costs will be less because we're only doing it once a month. Longer shelf lives, longer time for people to buy, and of course those were the gambles that worked, and it hasn't really ever looked back since then.
Indeed, yeah.
Do you still have association with the magazine?
Yes, I mean I still count all of the people who work on it as most of them are very, very dear friends indeed, and occasionally you do get asked to even add your own four penneth into discussions or articles where they're looking for a wide range. And fortunately, most of them have been sad ones recently. What you remember was Nicholas Courtney, what you remember was with Sladen. But it was nice when they said, well, okay, pick a story and give us one of your favourite moments for it. Tell the world out there why that episode or that story is particularly stunning. And it was quite interesting to trawl back in your mind and think, wow, what did sit out in that story for me? If you did hit me with the title, what were the bits that I remember? And that was really a great lot of fun to go and be asked to take something out of your own memory rather than just going and researching stuff.
Indeed, yeah.
To go and pull it from someone else's material.
And then, of course, there's the very famous book by Peter Haining, which you contributed to, was A Celebration.
Yes, the very first ever Doctor Who coffee table book. Again,
and people were saying that you were the authority. People's
Peter,
recollections of stories really come from your own.
Was a journalist, and in a way, he was what you'd call, in a nice possible way, a hack writer. He'd be brought in to do books based on Sherlock Holmes or anything else that was particularly common at the time. And so he came in with this camp thinking, right, I'm going to write about Doctor Who from an outsider's perspective. I'll be able to ask all the questions that the producers, the writers and things will be able to answer. Because any book on Doctor Who that's going to cover being a celebration of everything that's come before, he reckoned, well, you had to have something that told you about the programme, because really that's what they're attempting to do, to have a huge jumpstart book for all the people, because this is when America was really coming into the frame as well, in the 80s. And so, not knowing himself, we think, right, he was an idiot that could fill the centrepiece of the book with a discourse on each one of the the series that had been up until then. So again, it's a huge piece of work, and you kind of think, oh God, arrogantly you think, well, this has all been done before by the fanzines, and he says, well, forget fanzines, forget even the magazine. There's a whole different generation that buys books, and my God, he was right, because it's still been one of the top-selling Doctor Who titles ever.
And I'm sure copies still go around on eBay as well.
I'm sure they do. It's in good condition.
Okay, well, let's just take a break and go to our Fanoptica section, because
well, just got to hold a second. Have we got?
I've got adverts running.
Yeah, I think I got rid of that. We had a Glee advert on Ustream for a second there.
Some photos have been going around the internet this week. Someone's built a cat TARDIS.
What?
Oh, TARDIS
a
for
TARDIS
cats.
for cats.
Oh,
okay.
And the cat can pop in through the roof and just basically hang out inside its own TARDIS.
Oh, is it bigger on the inside?
I think for the cat, it's probably not. But it's that's been retweeted a lot today. I've noticed on Twitter.
I'm not surprised.
I mean, it has everything. It has Doctor Who and a cute kitty.
Yeah. What more do you want?
What more do you want, indeed?
YouTube built all over it.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the DVD review now. And considering what the latest DVD review is, it'd be interesting to get your take on this. The whole idea of these special editions, where they take a classic story and they tinker around with it, because the latest release, it's a classic John Pertwee story, Day of the Daleks. Now you do have the original release on the original story on one disc, but on the second disc you have Day of the Daleks with new scenes, new special effects, and brand new Dalek voices. How do you take to it when they do that kind of thing?
I'm tremendously supportive of the idea of doing special editions. Provided you never lose access to the original, because
this is the mistake I think the Star Wars.
I was about to say
have.
Star Wars was released the same day as Day of the Daleks, and with Day of the Daleks you have the original and new version together, and in fact the original version is on disc 1, so that's kind of like,
it's like
the special edition is
the extra,
the backup,
the extra copy. Yeah.
Whereas with Star Wars, I bought Star Wars, and it's been tinkered with even further.
But is there an original version?
There's no original version.
No,
you can't get hold of that. George Lucas doesn't want you to have it.
It's an absolute. To me, that's a travesty. It's a travesty.
When they did a presentation of all three of the original Star Wars movies in Elstree back in the late 80s, and there was even a message sent from George Lucas by the studios to the guys who were presenting, saying this is the last time you will ever be able to see Star Wars in its original format. And the weird thing was, we didn't believe it then, but you certainly kind of believe it now.
Yeah.
His ambition is to always have Star Wars the absolute best it can be. I've got no problem with people taking something like Day of the Daleks and making it different and making it relevant to a generation of possibly more in tune with seeing loads of Daleks.
Indeed.
But don't lose me my access to the original, because I'd like to have that for.
And also, the original is essentially the real canon, whereas the special edition, souped-up version is an extra.
Yeah.
You're giving people a huge amount of choice, which is what differentiates a lot of the 2 Entertain stuff from a lot of the other distributors who are just happy just to repackage and put out, perhaps versions of programs and films which aren't as good as
Blade Runner, which has had 3 director's cuts now, I think.
Oh, but the great thing again though is I've got Blade Runner on Blu-ray up on my shelf, and it's a 5-disc set
with all 5
versions of the film up there. So if I prefer the original release version to Ridley Scott's new he actually doesn't call it direct, he call it the final cut, and you have all 5 versions there.
Yeah, so I'll be copying my VHS of Star Wars to DVD one day.
Yeah.
Don't lose it.
I won't lose it, no, exactly. Day of the Daleks then. Let's just show a clip. Okay, we're having problems with the clips today for some reason. That happens sometimes. But here's some photos of the.
Oh, that's the redone Dalek City.
Dalek City in the future.
There's a classic press still of John Pertwee fighting the Daleks and the Ogrons.
Now, Ogrons, they really reminded me of Planet of the Apes. I mean, they look like, the outfits, the costumes, they're sort of very Planet of the Apes style gorilla, aren't they?
Well, they were originally done as almost like a make-up training exercise for BBC, and I don't quite know how the communication got through to Barry Letts, but he suddenly thought, wow, this would be a great idea to have them in Doctor Who. Which is why when you look at the pictures closely, you suddenly realise the masks don't quite fit some of the hulking great actors.
But they do. I really do think they're one of the first villains of the colour, first monsters of the colour Doctor Who period, where the makeup really does work. I felt the Ogrons, and then in the following season the Draconians.
And in fact, also
the hugely impressive, I felt, designs for monsters.
That was the genius of a designer called John Friedlander, who was probably the first one to start applying the type of makeup techniques which you'd seen in the movies from people like Stuart Freeborn and his name William Tuttle, starting to see that being done on British television. And he really was. He was the apex of the pyramid in terms of what he did.
I was always very sorry they never brought the Ogrons back. Well, I would have loved to have seen that to have become more canon with the Daleks. It actually made for me sense. It would be a bit like the Roman Empire and the British Empire. Every time you had a military force like that, you don't send your own people out to the front lines.
You send mercenaries.
You send somebody out. Yeah. The British army always would send the Irish or the Gurkhas out front. The Roman army would always send the Spaniards or their German soldiers out in the front lines. You don't send your own people there. And I always thought that made perfect sense for a race like the Daleks to have foot soldiers, and especially these incredibly thick foot soldiers that they could kick. And I always thought there could be great comedic value with just how stupid the Ogrons were with these technologically advanced Daleks.
You look at the interactions between the Master and the Ogrons in Frontier in Space.
I love that bit in one point where they've obviously got an actor and just somebody who's just high because he was big. We've got this one guy as an Ogron really playing up with his stupid voice going on, and then the next guy just goes nothing to report as quickly as possible because he's obviously just hired. He can't act. He's just a big tall guy.
He's big and tall.
Well, they hadn't actually overdubbed his that actor didn't have his line overdubbed. So
right.
He's saying it how they did it on the first take, whereas when they went back and sort of did it again, they actually overemphasised the fact that they should be seen as playing it a little bit more dense. If you think about it, they are basically cannon fodder. Yeah. And so you wouldn't have one that's too bright doing that role.
I mean, when I interviewed Dan Hall, and I met Dan Hall at the day of the Daleks launch, he said this is their title of 2011. This is their big title of 2011. Can you see why? I mean, his feeling was that this was a story that actually recent fans of Doctor Who, if they're dipping their toes into classic stories, John Pertwee stories, this was something that they could probably easily find quite accessible as a story.
It was a big event story when you heard.
It was the return of the Daleks in colour,
and in colour.
Yeah.
For even somebody of my advancing years at the time, the fact that you hadn't seen the Daleks since the 1968 repeat of Evil. And that was, when you're young, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And even then, to see the Daleks in colour, apart from the Peter Cushing movies, that had been something that had always been denied you. Even photographs, there were very few photographs in colour of the Daleks around in those days. So with the way they publicised it, the way they built it up, the competition, that superb Radio Times cover by Frank Hamser, everyone was on the edge of their seats waiting for it to come out. It was a big event.
In the special edition, what do you think of the special effects, the changes?
I thought they worked wonderfully. I've always found that I don't know how you feel, but it never affected me at the time when I was watching it. When I look back on some of those Doctor Who stories, when you've had laser battles going on, not so much when unit soldiers firing their rifles, when you've got laser battles going on and there's nothing there, it can sometimes look a bit like smoke, kids just playing with their toy guns. And just that little addition of laser fire in these special editions can actually add tension to the scenes.
Yeah,
I think they've been very sensitive the way they've done it, and I actually think of all the special editions they've done, this has actually been one of the better ones. There's a couple I haven't liked, and there's a couple which I felt have greatly enhanced the story, and I felt this has enhanced the story a lot.
I think.
Have you watched the special edition version?
I have. And what intrigued me is it's something that the Mill, some of the guys I was privileged to talk to at the Mill have said. All of those, most of the people who work there, they're all great Doctor Who fans, of course they are. and they're forever trying to get in references to what they regard as the canon of Daleks, which is the TV.
Well, what's that? I was about to say in the new series, all the Dalek spaceships are straight out of.
They follow Richard Jennings' original idea of what the sources look like. If you look very carefully at the episode, it's the last one with all the companions in it.
Stolen Earth, two-parter.
Look at one of the sequences right at the end. We see an effect shot. You even see one of the hoverbouts creeping in there, which one of the little guys just managed to sneak in there as a lovely little homage. I still think they're the one elements which we're waiting to see come into the series properly. I don't mind flying Daleks, great idea. You think somehow they
you want the flying platforms,
flying on their own without having their little armoured tank platforms with artillery on them. That would, that probably is for the feature film. But it's, to me,
and we still really want to see a proper, pint-sized Emperor Dalek, don't we?
I also want to see the Daleks going toe-to-toe with the mechanoids again.
Do you know that's probably one of the most requested toys that character options get? There were people saying, when are you going to do the
mechanoids? Really?
The big problem is they're going to be hugely expensive to do because of a lot of plastic and they're going to be very heavy, but they have been requested. Supposedly there is a prototype that's been approved, and rumblings are that it may happen next year, but I've been conscious of that ever since the days when Private Enterprises were doing their little Dalek miniatures and they were Rollikins and they were promising a mechanoid. It hasn't happened yet, but you're hoping
there was actually that was one of the first other monsters done as an action figure in the 60s. There was a mechanoid toy produced in the 60s, and it's one of the rarest ones to get hold of.
Almost the R2D2s of their days. There was a lot of gadgetry in a mechanoid. You had the arms, you had the flamethrower, you had the really interesting voice, which was imitative but not quite imitative. You had the little device that raised up and down when they spoke. They were designed to be permanent or semi-permanent features of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But because, as everyone knows, the problem was logistically they
just
didn't fit
too
in the
big.
studios
Yes.
So.
But they did become a regular feature of TV21.
Yes, because obviously David Witter could see their potential. Terry Nation wanted to see them exploited, and obviously the way to do it was to give the Daleks something that could oppose them on their own grounds.
Brad 1980-2012 asks, which version of Day of the Daleks would you consider to be the best? Do you
probably still the original. And that's only the purist in me saying yes. I'd always want to see the original episodes as best as they can be. Although I greatly enjoy the enterprise that goes into making.
But if you are a recent fan to Doctor Who in the last few years and you haven't watched much Doctor Who DVDs, this is a great one to actually get and watch the special edition.
The interesting thing is, what I will say is that a lot of the time with Doctor Who, you're talking about great scripts, great acting, usually not too bad sets, always good costumes, and it would always be let down if there was any model work or something like that involved. And when you talk of the new series, trying to get them to watch classic Doctor Who, sometimes, if I had a friend who had only ever watched the new series and say I wanted to introduce them to the Ark in space, a brilliantly written story, I would actually tell them to watch the special edition because their model work of the Ark is so bad. But Day of the Daleks, when I heard they were redoing the special effects on it, I was actually quite surprised, because I actually do think the original is one of those ones that because there's a couple which actually hold up, like you look at, say, the City of Death or something like that, where the special effects still hold up, and I think Day of the Daleks is one that does. I think the only thing anybody can really criticise on the original is at the end that Aubrey House is being attacked by 3 Daleks. But in my own mind,
that's a fault of the director.
Actually, in my own mind, that did make sense, because I always thought to myself, well, if you've got this Dalek empire that's all over the galaxy, well, basically maybe they've only got 3 Daleks looking after Earth, and a whole. They've got their Ogrons there, and they think, why do we need more than 3?
Discover later,
they're strong enough to take care of it.
As we discover later on in the David Tennant's era, is that you only need 3 Daleks.
Yes.
To take on an army.
One Dalek can conquer all Cybermen. Now, I wanted to ask you this before, and you were saying about the Mill and their love of TV21 Daleks. Made me think then, whose idea was it with the Cybermen? Their ships, the cyber ships, that we've been seeing in the new series are directly out of the story
Yes.
Invasion.
Invasion, yes.
Now, was that Stephen Moffat's choice, or do you think that was the Mills' choice?
I must admit, I really don't know. I could see, you could certainly see the culprits there being the Mill, and I could certainly see Stephen Moffat being, more than happy to see that happen. The director probably didn't know, as far as he's concerned. Spaceships are spaceships, so there's probably a little bit of collusion in there. But then again, it's lovely to have these little feuilletons for the fans.
I think Stephen Moffat is trying to say trying to get across that these are the Cybermen we've always known. They're stuck with the new design.
I don't see why they are stuck with it. I'm very disappointed that they footed up the budget for a new design on the Dalek when you actually had perfectly acceptable redesign already.
Oh, I think they've learnt the lesson on the Dalek.
Yeah.
So
and whereas the Cybermen, all much as good as the redesign was, the whole love for enjoyment of the Cybermen was always, how are they going to turn up next? What redesign, subtle or major, are they going to have? They very rarely turned up originally without some form of change or alteration having taken place.
It goes right back to the early days of Doctor Who and Monthly. What totally surprised us from the letters that came in was when they did a story. I think it was called The Junkyard Demon.
Oh yes, and it
which
was
featured the 10th Planet ones. And almost from that point onwards, people have had this interest and fascination with the original Cybermen. Because in a way they looked even more eerie than their later
what made them look really eerie was...
They look like ghosts, really.
But they actually looked more like a combination of... When you look at Cybermen, you wouldn't actually think there was an organic component to them.
No.
And yet every
time
like
they
have done that... I mean, one of the big things that the fans all went on about was in Earthshock. The actual Cybermen had organic jaw. But they had to get rid of that because apparently it was steaming up on the glass. But I know a lot of fans have reacted to in the classic Cybermen from the 10th Planet is they've got human hands.
Yes.
And it looks like that they've just had, a sheet of metal placed over a face. So there's something more organic to that than what you have in a lot of the others. And the nowadays Cybermen is just a brain in a robot, but in the original series,
there were a lot of people.
It was a lot of spare part surgery going on.
I mean, that's probably the problem is that the new Cybermen do look brilliant, and they cost a lot of money.
Yeah,
and it is true that costumes, special effects costumes, do cost a lot of money these days. That's why you've seen them gradually paring down the amount of new monsters in the program because we are approaching a point now in the program's making where money is tight. A lot of money's got to be paid back before they can even make another series. And obviously, from the point of view of budget-conscious producers, if you've got a dozen or so Cybermen costumes in there, are you going to reuse those, or are you going to commission Neil Gorton or somebody to make you a whole new Cyberman costume? Well, it's 90% of the time it's going to be a no-brainer. I think the Daleks were an interesting experiment because I think the original story that they were being redone because of high definition television has been proved to be a little bit apocryphal.
I thought it's just the idea is it's easier for the operators inside to actually move around.
Well, they weren't because some of the operators they're very top heavy.
Right.
So it's like almost trying to heave a supermarket trolley.
I just instantly assume myself that each year they've got to have a new type of Dalek out there because all the merchandisers need it for the Christmas market.
Well, I'm sure we'll be corrected, but somewhere along the line I seem to remember reading that Stephen Moffat had this wonderful idea that he'd like to make the Daleks look a lot more like the film, the Peter Cushing.
That's right, yeah.
Which everyone would have jumped up and down thinking, wow, yeah.
But that's just a matter of colours, it's not a matter of design, is it?
But somewhere along the line, as this work got contracted and subcontracted and redesigned and obviously optimised with because it's a lot easier just to find something that will fit than it is to build something new.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the time all these bits and pieces were put together, Mark Gatiss' phrase, I'm officially the most excited I've ever been at looking at these. Thinking, okay, unofficially, what
well, that'll be the interesting one, and eventually, in a few years' time, when everything gets repackaged, we only get the Doctor Who confidential happy clappy version of the event.
Have you been to the Doctor Who Experience, the one at Olympia?
Yes.
Have you seen that tableau where out come the Teletubby Daleks, and then all of a sudden there's this big space battle as the pure Daleks, the children of Davros Daleks, come in to basically saying you're an abomination, you're staying on the Dalek race, and You're led to get the impression that they're going to blow them out.
They're going to blow them out.
Water.
Yeah, we shall see. We shall see. They're going to come back at some point, I suppose, for the 50th anniversary.
Well,
maybe
they have to come back. Although it'll be interesting to see what happens this season, because if they don't turn up before the end of the season, this will be the first new season of Doctor Who that they haven't had
Just
the
remember,
Daleks return.
Writers like to lie, particularly.
Oh, didn't Russell T Davies say to us that at the end of season 1 the Daleks were dead, they were gone, they weren't coming back, and you wouldn't be seeing them fighting the Cybermen at the end of that season?
I certainly won't have a Covenant like the Master back in the series.
Yes. So the writers do like to lie, but we only have a few episodes left. But again, if they want to keep it cheap, they've got an awful lot of Dalek units out there in the back.
And a lot of Cybermen as well.
Yeah. Well, I have actually seen, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, I have actually seen some photos from later on in the season. It does look as if the Cybermen may be returning.
Not expecting me to corroborate this.
Well, on the subject of the Daleks, I mean, when you first got to see a Dalek, how was that? I mean, because obviously on television, because obviously the first 4 episodes, you know, it was a caveman set story, and suddenly you're into proper science fiction, really, with the Daleks.
The very first episode of Dead Planet's the only episode that I've actually had to leave the room for, because you know something is following Barbara through this city. You know there's something tracking and moving it towards some fixed point, and you know the kid in me was getting to the point where you know just something really nasty is going to happen. So I actually watched that last cliffhanger with that tremendous scream, which I still don't think has been better to this day, literally through the crack between a door, because it was that frightening. When you saw the Dalek, yes, it does not disappoint at all. Again, going back to the Mechanoids, it's pure gadget robot. It's got everything that would fascinate a child.
But there's absolutely, you can, when you look at a Dalek, you can see straight away eyes, limbs, so forth. But there's nothing actually humanoid about it.
But there's also something incredibly beautiful about them. When you see those first...
They are
first
iconic
Daleks.
designs, really, aren't they? I mean, they're as a British... They should be in the Victoria and Albert Museum, I suppose. Really, shouldn't they?
Do you know who was originally in the BBC charged with designing them, but he then went on holiday? Was Ridley Scott.
Really?
Yes.
He was a designer at the BBC.
Yeah.
And he went on a 3-week holiday, so he didn't get to design the Daleks.
Ray Cusick did.
Yes.
I hate to think what Ray Cusick thinks of the new ones. Hoping to ask him to.
You picked earlier when we spoke the Web of Fear as being one of your favourites. Now this is the Abominable Snowman, which of course a lot of us won't get to see.
Well, we can see an episode or 2 of it.
Yeah.
I think the Web of Fear, a lot of people have commented on the fact that one of the Doctor Who's strongest stories is the old base under siege. Which,
Yeah.
You go right from Waters of Mars
Yeah.
backwards as many times as you like. But this was one, the underground is almost built for that type of gothic horror story. Fill it with another one of these interesting monsters that has the glowing eyes, the bleeping sound effect, the web guns, and which is one of them. Yeah, children always like interesting ways of seeing people killed.
Yeah.
Certainly, as a child watching Doctor Who, it was always interesting to see what kind of death ray would they have, and it was amazing how it wasn't just the Star Trek phaser effect. They have all these different things like a web gun or the distorting sonic weapon for the ice warriors. Look at all the ones that have really made the grade as monsters. How many of them have had interesting ways of killing people, even the Autons with the gun in their hand. It's an interesting weapon. It's not just yet another prop gun.
Now, going back to a story we were discussing earlier, the Dominators. In fact, it was the Dominators as a result of that story and the Quarks that we didn't get the Yeti or the Great Intelligence returning on Doctor Who, because the writers ended up having a big argument with the BBC over the copyright of the Quarks, and so because originally they were going to write Jamie McCrimmon's last story, which was going to feature the Yeti in 17th century Scotland.
That's in the rumour, yes, and you think it would certainly work. I mean, the Yeti are I think the problem was for Hazen Lincoln, you couldn't copyright the Yeti because they're abominable snowmen, and we own the rights on the designs of the costume. The Quarks, of course, they can claim that they came up with the original idea. Unfortunately, the design obviously wasn't quite up to it, so it's a shame that that we didn't get to see it. But having seen the character options prototype for the Mark II Yeti, they look beautiful. And we really are hoping that they'll be a very big and strong seller for.
I think out of all the classic monsters which haven't returned, I think the great, not so much the Yeti, but the Great Intelligence itself, would work perfectly within the new series.
It does. I mean, the great beauty of Doctor Who is that you can mine its past history in a way that not many shows, probably with the exception of Star Trek, can do. If you were to ask me what's my preference, I would like to see a designer rise to the challenge of recreating a monster perfectly but exactly as it was. Probably one of the most requested ones is the Zygons.
Yes.
But what I'd hate to see is someone just come out with a totally different race of Zygons and say, well, they're Zygons.
I have to say, I was really disappointed with, what I loved about as a kid, when you would see the original book with the Chris Achilleos drawings of the Silurians, was they just looked so alien. A third eye, the mouth was so different.
The interesting voice
there was
again.
Because I was going to get to that, is that when you actually see the episode, the design of them is better than the execution. The execution was a bit wonky, I felt, and I was very much looking forward when I heard they were coming back to seeing what, and I felt they went a very lazy route with the Silurians. Suddenly they didn't look like this, like a really reptilian.
Well, they did look really reptilian. In fact, they were beautifully designed reptile aliens. But it's rather like you're thinking, okay, what makes a Silurian memorable? Why do people remember them? And again, going back to the design of the Dalek, there is something in a design that says, how are we going to do this? Now, if you go back to John Nathan Turner's era, he wanted the Cybermen changed because he wanted that interaction with human characters, and felt that full face masks never gave you that sort of thing. So human masks are the way to go. The new Silurians are probably an extension of that. In that you get that eye contact, you get that facial expression, you get the beautiful design of them. But part of you, certainly as a fan that's grown up with it, you kind of think, it's not quite a Silurian. I know, except it's a cousin, but most people I've spoken to certainly miss the idea of having the third eye in there somewhere, because that was an iconic part of it, and it's gone missing. You just call them something else, not Silurians, and it would work. The fact that you call them Silurians, you're presenting people with 66% of what makes the Silurian a Silurian.
I have to say that the Ice Warriors, I think in terms, if you took a design as they originally were and just popped them in the new series, I can't see how the Ice Warriors would go wrong, because that in themselves, they look as good as anything that's done today.
It's back to the challenge of whether a designer is prepared to be as faithful in their reproduction of it. Look at
they always have to, or they put their stamp on it.
Or do they think, no, exactly as you said.
I have to say, I felt quite interesting. Also, another one, which I was both very happy with and a bit disappointed with, were the Sontarans, because I thought the actual faces and the look of the Sontaran's face looked identical to what was in the original series, but better, using better materials. But I felt that their costumes, their actual armour, suddenly looked like this horrible Dayglow thing.
And of course, the Sontarans aren't time travellers, so they should still have the same continuity of outfits, because we've seen them in their past and in their future.
Funny enough, I think most people were forgiving of the new design of the Sontarans. Look at the ratings.
It's the fake muscles on the costumes that kind of look strange.
Mailbag started exploding a bit was when they did the one in the Good Man Goes to War, where all of a sudden you had the lactating
nurse.
That was actually really quite a nice guy and quite jolly. And I think one of my correspondents wrote to me saying, I don't mind them buggering up their own monsters when they bugger up the monsters that I grew up with.
Brad 1980-2012 agrees, would like to see the Ice Warriors again.
Well, I think the Ice Warriors are probably the last of the big main monsters from the old series which haven't been brought back yet.
Yeah, they've been mentioned.
They've been mentioned in Waters of Mars, and wasn't there one episode when Rose Tyler said to the Doctor, was it in Tennant's first one, when she says about Martians, and the Doctor says, yes, there are Martians. There was some kind of oblique reference to them as well, but we've had the Daleks, we've had the Cybermen,
Tom Greaves mentions Monster Paladin in a message.
Monster Peladon.
Monster Peladon. And
Agador.
and actually, I think the great idea behind that story is that we do have all these alien races, and you get a sense that actually there is some dialogue going on between ambassadors and things.
What I thought was interesting with the
that's a story that could return really.
Well, with the Curse of Peladon, what was interesting with the Ice Warriors was they did something you've seen only done with probably the Draconians is only one I can really think of, where suddenly they make an alien race. They're not good or bad. They're like humans. You've got some good in them. You've got some bad in them. And suddenly the Ice Warriors were presented as an alien monster that you could have a dialogue with.
And also they richly constructed their culture. They gave them two different species, the landed gentry type ice swords and the regular Ice Warrior troopers. So you can see why there's a kind of believability in there, because the Ice Warriors, instead of just being treated as monster of the week, were very much an integral part of both of the Peladon stories, particularly Curse, where Islia turned out to be the good guy in a way that totally surprised certainly anyone watching at the time, because you weren't expecting that.
Well, the Naked Scarf, they want to know, would they dare bring back Alpha Centauri? I always remember when I was a little kid getting a toilet tube and a ping pong ball and making myself my own Alpha Centauri.
Alpha Centauri would be a CGI one though these days, wouldn't it?
I think Alpha Centauri would work great.
But why can't we find out a bit more about the race? We've only met one representative of that entire race, and
I think it's just one of those things, that the budget's got to be there, the story's got to be there, the will to do it's got to be there. I mean, Big Finish have been doing stuff with the Ice Warriors for time, and
it's a Big Finish though. They can crank out whoever they want.
Whatever they want.
They brought back the Mara, they brought back the Quarks and the Dominators. But
they do it so well. And the main thing is you are able to.
I think we've got to get Jason Hay-Ellery on this show.
Sometime. Sean, you mentioned Ark in Space earlier. Jeremy, you've picked this out as one of your favourite shows.
It's a brilliant story, that one.
Again, I think it's because in a way it predates all the success that the film Alien.
Yes.
Really in a way, actually, we didn't mention on Day of the Daleks. That predates all the Terminator. Success.
To a degree as well, it does.
When I was watching it at the launch, I was thinking of the Terminator, but as they say in the extras, it's been a pretty common theme in science fiction writing.
Alien, there are some real strong links with the Ark in Space, especially in terms of the Wirran's life cycle, in that it actually lays its eggs inside its host.
The host from the inside out.
Yeah.
When I watched Robot, I was a little bit uncertain about how well Tom Baker was going to be as a new Doctor. I love John Pertwee, and there's a little bit of the slightly OTT Tom Baker in Robot. As soon as Ark in Space came on, that's when the moment where I thought, my God, this guy has really got it. The Homo sapiens speech is obviously an iconic moment in there.
Yeah.
But as well, when you suddenly realise you've got this tremendously strong cast with Ian Marter and Elizabeth Sladen as backup, and none of them is wasted in that. You straight away you suddenly see three characters really coming together and experiencing the growing horror of this being trapped aboard this space station with this emergent race of parasites which are out there to basically take over the last remnants of humanity and devour them. Tremendously scary story, and that speaks of someone who was in adulthood by then.
I think that's one which goes with the Tomb of the Cybermen, where brilliant set design also was one of the reasons why it's become so iconic also in people's minds.
Well, it's the whiteness that somehow of all the walls that just somehow
it's
means
a bit like the recent story. It's completely antiseptic.
It just says futuristic, doesn't it?
It does, in a way that you haven't seen before. The set you think the set is so much bigger than it actually is. It's two tiers, and quite simply realised. But my God, that transom set, the one where you actually walk out into the walls of the outer walls of the space station. That was a gasp moment when we first saw that.
What I also think was brilliant in this story is something that Robert Holmes was so good at doing was his use of language. And you could have a story like the Talons of Wang Chiang and he'd be using all kind of like Victorian phrases or stuff like that. But then a story like this or the Underworld and he would create a futuristic slang and change within the language, and he was always very, very clever, which I haven't seen many other sci-fi writers actually do on television.
No, I think Louis Marks paid in the ultimate. He said he was a constantly well-educated hack, and that was he could actually generate tremendous stories, but there was such a richness in there. You know, one of my other favourites is Carnival of Monsters, which works on so many different levels, but you have everything from carnival speak to civil service speak to naval speak.
There was actually a joke in Carnival of Monsters when they're trying to get the vid machine through customs, and he's going on, there's nothing political with this. And I don't know why, it always made me think of the joke in the second news story when they say about leaving religion, that religion is banned on the ship. And I always found those two jokes very similar to each other.
The other great line in Carnival of Monsters is give a functioning a hygiene chamber and you'll store fossil fuel in it, which is all about what they said about give a miner a bath and you'll put coal in it. Again, it's Robert Holmes using his rich knowledge of literature and rich knowledge of quotations.
Russell T Davies actually compared him to Dennis Potter and said that if he hadn't been writing science fiction but had just been writing regular drama, he would have been regarded on the level of Dennis Potter within the BBC.
But then I think it was Malcolm Holt when he wrote about how to write for TV in the 70s. He had a quote from Robert Holmes. He says, I've adapted Shakespeare, I've written plays, I've done dramas that have been award-winning on radio. It says, as soon as I do a Doctor Who, everyone from my Auntie Ethel to the milkman knows that. Thinking, well, you can achieve fame in all sorts of different ways. And I think he didn't know how much he was respected. And Eric Saywood said about the sheer terror of meeting the man for the first time, because he thought, oh, is he going to just look at the two of us and think what a right bunch of whatevers when he came in? So, he's this tall bloke, ex-policeman sort of thing, and here we are, working on the show that he took to unbelievable heights of success. So you can see that even amongst his peers, he was tremendously highly regarded.
It was interesting that he took such a long break from the show, and then when he came back, it was with the Caves of Androzani. Sometimes when somebody leaves something for a period and they come back, they kind of like, it's no good. It's kind of like, the show's evolved beyond that. But literally he came back and that was like seen as one of the best stories that's ever been produced for the series.
When you think of the problems that it had during its production, God, I remember seeing the poor guy who built that the Magma Monster,
God, yes.
Which is sort of like seen in two shots, almost crying over the fact that whole stuff had been deleted. And people, when I arrived in the viewing gallery, saying, all kinds of problems, things aren't working, they've had to delete this, that, and the other. And you're thinking, it's going to be another clunker, isn't it? And of course, when you see it all put together, with the choice of music that Graham Harper commissioned, with the performances that all of the leads gave, and of course, saying Robert Holmes' lines, yes, you can see why the quality ultimately.
So do you think Warriors of the Deep and the Merca would have actually worked if Graham Harper had been directing it?
Well, the weird thing was, and I go back to my own experiences, when you were working on the Doctor Who magazine, of course, in those days you got to see the scripts quite a long way in advance, because you have to worry about writing articles to be at least reasonably contemporaneous. So you'd start reading this thing and you think, wow, this is quite amazing. And I read Warriors of the Deep thinking, this is like Stingray, but with actors. And you kind of had this mental image of this dragon creature, probably out of something out of one of the old, the Hammer films, or the sort of Land of Time Forgot type thing, without realising, no, actually it is on the BBC budget, and you do feel sorry for poor Matt Irving, because again he was asked to pull something out of the fire to achieve something that in those days was realistically beyond them. And that would often be the case. You'd occasionally get great scripts. Nightmare of Eden, I still remember reading that thinking, God, this is going to be hard hitting. Straight away you were thinking Alien, the mandrels in the tunnels of the spacecraft, this idea of ships merging together and monsters that dissolve down into a hallucinogenic drug. And thinking, am I passing this? Because when you see it now, when you see it on DVD, you kind of think, it's one of the shows where the money ran out, isn't it? Tom Baker was taking the mickey out of it. So you can have a great script, but if other elements aren't in place, then even the best script in the world can't necessarily be salvaged.
So what's it like being in the viewing galleries and when you're watching the shows being shot in the studios? It
was a bittersweet experience. It was great that you had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
I said this is a little kid going to see The Dominator, but doing it as an adult and being paid for it. what was a sobering experience was sometimes when you'd see something being done on the floor, you think, oh, it's a bit tacky that one. It's finally finished, it looked a lot better. And then seeing Underworld, the point where they bring the seers onto the set and they say, right, put your helmets on. And these guys put what I thought looked like waste paper bins with a couple of ping pong balls on them. And you think, right, okay, well, what are they going to do with that? And of course, when you see them on television, it's exactly the same. It looks like, it comes across as a better story, but the trouble is you're always seeing just little jigsaw bits of it, so you lose the context. So it's not the great emotional experience that you kind of thought it would have been. I think you'd probably got a lot more out of seeing the show being done linearly in the very early days, where you were watching the whole thing as a narrative performance.
Sure.
And seeing performance rather than just little bits of cutaways.
Yeah.
To go back to the girl who waited. Go through that. Next time you watch that, just look how long some of those scenes are. They're some of the longest scenes I can remember for quite a while, which gives you that time to build up and overcome divisions as a budget, because they're concentrating on the performance
and characters.
It's hard to do that when you're just seeing little scenes being shot in isolation and not being able to see it all together.
We mentioned Remembrance of the Daleks earlier. This is another one of your picks.
I love Remembrance of the Daleks because I really, for 4 weeks, it was like suddenly Doctor Who became cool again.
Yes, absolutely.
That story suddenly, it had everything. It even had the big spaceship coming down into the playground.
And like the War Dalek.
A special weapons Dalek.
Special weapons Dalek, yes.
But again, one of the lovely scenes to me, funny enough, isn't one of the big sequences. It's the little one in part 2 where the Doctor goes into a tea shop.
Oh,
yes.
as
and orders a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And he has that reflective moment of saying, oh, but, what if we could decide that everyone was going to have sugar in the tea? What an amazing how that would be. And that's, again, that's Doctor Who doing what it does brilliantly, which is occasionally just slowing things down to give you something reflective, to give you more insight into the character and the mind. Doctor's must be an incredibly different character to write for, because it's easy to have him shouting, leaping around and being brilliant. It's a lot more difficult to have him connecting with all the reasons why he loves humanity, why he loves human beings, why he can't live without human beings. That's one of them. He's thinking about, this is what it's all about. It's about stopping everyone wanting tea at the same time, everyone having to beat up a Dalek and just thinking the same way as they do. It's little bits like that. I think that people who stuck with the series for a long time realise it just adds to their enjoyment of the programme as it goes along.
Like me, you're a defender of the TV movie.
Yes, because
I think I really enjoy it.
I'm right up there with Barry Letts saying, yes, somewhere along the lines the script fell apart.
Yeah.
After we sort of really got the master in.
Yeah.
But you think, in a way, almost the easiest thing to have fixed is the script.
Yes.
Everything else about the TV movie, absolutely.
They had a budget. They had special effects. They had action.
Especially Paul McGann. I think he actually comes across as the strongest thing, and he actually. Very often you feel an actor needs an episode or two to fit into the role, but he managed to hit the character straight away and the look and everything. I think he really could have been a great Doctor had he had a few more. Well, he did get more time with Big Finish.
A wish list for mine. I know Russell T Davies always says we will never ever show the Time War. The Time War's just so big, you can't do it. But you're thinking, I don't care if you to see the whole thing, but just to have one small, even so 5 minutes of something that happened in the Time War. But the Doctor there is McGann, because I think he's still young enough, he can still wear the wig and can still appear as that character, even if it's only some sort of extended flashback. And who knows? I mean, we're still away yet from Saturday 23rd of November 2013. So anything is possible.
I know I think there's lots of people riding on the 50th anniversary for a lot of things.
At San Diego, during his guest talk, when somebody asked about what they would like to see for the 50th anniversary, Matt Smith actually turned around and said, "Bring back Tom Baker."
I think that would be interesting.
The one problem for me there is he looks nothing like.
And that is always the thing. Yeah, we were talking earlier about could you replace Sarah Jane's the Sarah Jane Adventures by concentrating on another character, and you realise that due to just Anno Domini, it's very difficult to think of a way of sustaining. Changing a format, but keeping the format the same to keep your loyal audience. and finding ones from that era of the programme that still work. I mean, you kind of think Sophie Aldred is probably the one that could most carry that up if you have a mind to do it that way.
Brad 1980-2012 says the Dalek going up the stairs and Remember It's a Dalek episode 1 is one of the most iconic moments in Doctor Who history. Jitesh Vora says Paul McGann was a good Doctor. And Brad 1980-2012 again says Robert Holmes was definitely the best classic Who writer. Incredible episodes.
I think he was the best Doctor Who writer, period. Classic, new, if you want to differentiate between the new and the old series, I think the only story I've seen for me which is as good as something Robert Holmes would have written were actually two I can think of, Girl in the Fireplace and Blink. But other than that, Robert Holmes, all of his, that was the best stuff.
Yeah, and you could see him just growing in stature as he went through the series. You think even
I do always wish they'd had a different director on the two Doctors, though. I think he delivered a good script for that. I think it's very poorly put together, that story.
Likewise with Power Crowell, you just wish they had a bit more of a budget, because he was setting out to write the creepy monster in the marsh story.
Yeah.
And again, the technology wasn't quite up to realising the ambitions.
That's one of the target books I think Power of Cry I just read several times.
It's a very good story.
It's a great book, that was actually a great book. And so out of the recent years, you've picked Father's Day and The Lodger.
Well, Father's Day, again, that's where I really thought the series has not only scaled the heights of some of the best that's ever been done in the past, but it's now working on a human and emotional level. In a way that the others that they've done the big picture stories. This was one that was actually quite small. It's basically the events of Rose's mother's wedding, but seeing it through the tragedy that is going to. It's almost unlike Hitchcock. Hitchcock gives you all the information up front, and the suspense comes as you're sitting there screaming at the characters to look behind them, or don't do this or don't do that. And that's really, it has that sort of build up of the Hitchcock suspense in it. So that's again, to me, it was no surprise that was high on my list. Which was the other one?
The Lodger.
And The Lodger, because I love the idea of Doctor Who being able to do a fun episode. They've done humour in the series in the past.
Doctor playing football.
But this one was genuinely funny. There were some absolute laugh out loud moments. Gareth Roberts has a superb grasp of dialogue and characterisation, and I think this was where they just took the lead off him and just said, right, now run with it. And he suddenly delivers an unfettered Gareth Roberts, and you can see why the guy is absolutely the perfect person to write Sharda as a book, because he's steeped in how to write for the Fourth Doctor, Romana and K9. He delivered all that sort of comedy, but with a dramatic edge as well.
Yeah.
He's just gifted. I'm really looking forward to seeing the Closing Time, lovely title, that's coming up in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, in a week and a half, isn't it?
Now we were talking earlier about the Day of the Daleks and the special editions. You were saying they shouldn't be viewed as canon. How do you feel about Sharda? Should that be viewed as a canon story, or?
Absolutely. There's quite an intellectual debate with Tom Spilsbury.
Or do you not think it should be
about
remade?
When Story 200 should have happened.
Yeah.
Because I think Sharda, although it is an incomplete story, it isn't going to be incomplete forever.
Well, there was a kind like a patchwork when they released it on video. You had Tom Baker narrating through it,
and there's a version being done now which replaces the missing scenes with flash animation, which will give you at least the same sort of experience that you had watching The Invasion on DVD.
Will they be able to get? Will Tom Baker be adding some narration?
That's going to be interesting, because they've done it without Tom Baker. Obviously, he just sorry, too busy did one. If ultimately it gets commissioned and made, presumably possibly for
to entertain,
you probably would have to bring Tom in, which means you've got to overcome the problem of Tom's voice. It's he's older than when he did it, and also you've got to do the opposite of how animation works. You've actually got to have someone lip syncing to animation that's already been done, which is phenomenally difficult. So there are challenges there, but then you've only got to look another 20 years ahead to what technology will be like 20 years in the future, and Sharda will be completed. It will take
CGI, three-dimensional
photographic,
actors,
photorealistic rendition and all that sort of thing. it will be done. And so at that point, so you can't deny it that it's not the 109th story. It will become the 109th story.
The Naked Scarf says, sometimes I wonder if Shada had been completed, would it be considered so important?
The mere fact that it was written by Douglas Adams would have let it to be viewed as very important, because he's probably the most successful writer Doctor Who's had on the show.
You look at the dialogue, it's very sparkling. You look at the way in which Adams does his great twisting of logic. Okay, if you're not a human being, you don't need air or the spaceship. Great, I'm switching the air off. Plus, he's come up with that concept, which hasn't really been explored yet, where he devised the concept of a TARDIS being disguisable inside as well as out.
Yeah.
Notice his room is a TARDIS. You pull down the bookshelf, there's the controls. It's a bit like X-Zero and Stingray. All of a sudden, all the controls are hidden and disguised inside.
And of course, Douglas Adams as a writer has a fan base outside of Doctor Who.
That's what I was saying. I mean, there would always have been far more interest in this story than almost any other Doctor Who, just because of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Dirk Gently has got this huge mainstream fan base to it.
Tom Greaves has just ordered Day of the Daleks on DVD.
I think he'll enjoy it a lot.
Very happy to have helped make that decision.
You won't be disappointed. The extras are good as well.
I have to say, the extras are always. I mean, I buy the new the classic stories on DVD purely for the extras. Really, that's my primary.
I find I sometimes get disappointed when I buy a TV box set or a TV.
Nothing. There isn't a single one which comes even close.
Episodes on it.
And I've even been buying the re-releases they've done, the revisitation ones, which are basically stories you already own, but you're buying because there's now a disc of brand new extras on them.
Star Trek did that first, didn't they?
Yes.
Yes, another documentary that you've never seen before.
Well, Star Wars has new documentaries every time there's a re-release, isn't there?
I mean, I'm really hoping I'm seeing the full spec of how it's being, everything that's on the package, but when Pathfinders in Space is released later this year, which is almost the ancestor series to Doctor Who.
Pathfinders, is that being? I didn't realise that was being.
Yep. Network are bringing the whole everything that survives.
Goodness.
Everything about.
I mean, I saw that.
Can you explain explain it to those fans who are watching?
It was a TV show, though, wasn't it? Pathfinders.
Pathfinders was certainly produced by Sidney Newman.
Yeah.
And again, it's this lineup of the elderly professor, the specialist, the young heroic pilot character, and some younger leads, children. And again, it's all about the space race to be the first peoples to the moon.
Wasn't there I think there was Pathfinders to Space, where they go to the moon, Pathfinders to Mars, Pathfinders. There's like 3 series on it.
So it's also kind of a precursor for Lost in Space as well, perhaps.
But much more literary and educated. I mean, the whole thing was supposed to be to do it as they weren't going to sort of like have a bubble-headed robot. And
what will be interesting for Doctor Who fans is that you can almost see Sidney Newman looking at the sort of C.S. Lewis presentation that's in Pathfinders and thinking, okay, that's almost what I want to do, but a little bit too much of the uptight Brits here. And so by the time he's sitting there having the ideas for Doctor Who, already the pipe smoking professor is modifying into this slightly more eccentric character, which is the Doctor, the young hero, space pilot. He's a much more ordinary guy, kitchen sink teacher.
How much of the show actually survives? Does it all still survive?
Pretty much all. I think Target Lunar was never recorded. I think I would need to confer to something like Andrew Pixley on this, but maybe a few bits missing from maybe it was at Pathfinders. But Mars and Venus are certainly intact. Right. And by all accounts, from people who've seen the work that's been done, they've done a very good job of remastering it. And it would just be lovely to bring it to. That's one
that shocks me to hear is actually coming out, because it was never released on video or and it just seems to me.
No, there was material that was missing that would prevent it from being done on video. But now, of course, we're in the era of the DVD box set, when we can even overcome shortcomings by saying, "Well, this is the best and most complete that you're ever likely to have it." It was lovely when
I'm very excited to hear that that's going to be.
It was lovely when they had the riots in Enfield and the DVD's depot was burnt down. So many people wrote to Network saying, "God, is Pathfinder safe? Is it?" the MD actually had emailed back to him saying, yes, don't worry, the glass masters are all safe, the originated printed materials all there. So yes, there's a lot of
so and its network was going to, because they recently done some fantastic work with The Prisoner and Space 1999 on the Blu-ray releases.
Yeah. Again, it's like to entertain. It's a company that cares about what they're doing. Probably has an even more restricted budget than to entertain, but they generate results and make an awful lot of serious TV and film buffs very happy.
I'm just hoping they get the second season of Space 1999.
We've been nattering for 95 minutes now. Right. Very briefly, this week's Torchwood. No.
Now there we have Captain Jack up against the giant crack in the world. Yes.
Well, we know he's got to survive because Captain Jack's coming back next year.
And next week, well, this week I guess we got more Scary Dolls.
Yeah.
Ventriloquist dummy. You think, my God, Steve Moffat has to enjoy torturing his kids.
And David Williams.
Of course. Oh God, that's terrifying in itself. I downloaded.
That's what he looks like after he's been swimming in the Thames.
I downloaded the latest episode of Torture, and I've already watched the final, and you get my opinion next week.
Yeah, we'll discuss it next week. I mean, the whole series.
It's a bit, for me, frustrating. I don't get this with Sarah Jane, but for Tortured, it's a Doctor Who spin-off, so as a Doctor Who fan, I feel like I'm supposed to follow it. But I don't think I've ever seen a spin-off from another show
that you don't want.
That feels so utterly divorced from its original source material. And it doesn't seem to me like a show that's been produced or created that would have any interest to a fan of Doctor Who.
I find it interesting. I don't know whether it's just a personal opinion, but I think John Barrowman almost gives two different types of performances. Whether he's playing Captain Jack in Doctor Who, which is really the big, loud person of great bonhomie and rivalry with the sparring with the Doctor, and the character he plays in Torchwood, which is much more angst-ridden, fallible, and if anything, he kind of almost underplays the reason why you think we cast John Barrowman in a role.
He's not. I mean, he's quite limited as an actor. John Barrowman. He's essentially playing John Barrowman.
Yeah.
Yes, and you should let him do that, because when he was first introduced as the character, he obviously made an impact because he was so good at playing John Barrowman.
Yeah.
He recently announced to all the fans of Doctor Who, he asked them all to write in, because he wants to be involved in he wants Captain Jack to return for the 50th anniversary.
He'll be the one driving the tram that goes off the bridge in 1963 and smashes up the junkyard.
All right, well, Jeremy, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure listening to you. Yeah, absolutely.
It's been enormous fun, guys. I just hope we haven't bored the audience.
They're still there. They're still there. Although I think Naked Scarf says he has to go to bed now.
He's not the only one.
Guys, thanks for watching.
We'll be back next week. What we'll have to decide. We'll check on the Twitter, but we'll announce what DVD we will review next week. But
Indeed. Well, if you've got a suggestion, just tweet us at Talking Who. Let us know if there's a DVD we haven't. Perhaps you're thinking of buying it, you're not sure, you want to get our opinion first.
How can anybody be watching the show and not have bought them already?
Well, there's a lot of DVDs, fans of different eras.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know which ones they're going to buy. They've heard of stories.
You buy them all. They're all every single Doctor Who story, even Time Lapse.
Okay.
Has something.
But maybe they're going to buy them in a particular order.
Yeah.
A few people have written to me this week saying they feel a bit cheated having forked out for the first half of the season as a Blu-ray box set. To now discover they've just announced they're going to do a complete box set.
But they were always going to do that, weren't they? I mean, wasn't that obvious?
Yes, it's not as if there isn't a precedent. Yes, it's still somebody out there thinking,
and they'll put some extras on it that weren't on the other ones, so they'll force people to. Oh God, yeah. So. Yes, well, such as the terrors of marketing. But thanks for watching. Thank you for being on the show, and me and Elisar will be back next week reviewing the latest episode, looking at Torchwood, and reviewing a DVD as well.
Indeed, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. See you.
Bye-bye.